All right, perfect. Well, let's just hop right into this, right? So first of all, thank everybody for coming. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this Edwin Insights that we're doing. This is the second Edwin Insights that we're doing so far. Second Edwin Insights that we're doing so far on the topic of rescheduling versus descheduling at the federal level in the cannabis industry. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chad Anderson. I am co-founder and CEO of Payroll Consultants, a leading business consulting firm here in New York, specialized in cannabis. Before we get too far into things, I do just want to take some time to thank the individuals that assist in helping make this happen tonight. We got our realty for the beautiful location. She's downstairs. I know she's on some meetings. She'll be up shortly though. Selling Financial Group, my guy Edwin, EEWC, the beautiful Brandi, and my guy Steve Vanderwall from Bandies. Thank you guys truly from A-Room to you guys. I appreciate everything you guys do for me and assist me. I want to get this going today. So I do just want to talk a little bit about who A-Room are. So, A-Room was founded off of the need to provide. And when we say provide, what does that mean, right? One, provide for our family, obviously. That's the point of working, right? And two, provide for our community. We started off as potential operators. When we got into this industry, we were under the impression that we wanted to be a licensor like everybody else. After some knowledge building and some research, we just figured out that was not our lane. But still, while we're thinking about providing for our community, we did still think, what can we provide that kind of aligns with what we're doing? Taking our educational experiences, everything we're doing in the legacy market, we're like, okay, we can just build out this consulting brand. So that's exactly what we did. Just combine, like I said, our educational experiences, everything that we were doing in our personal lives, and brought it together for a collective. With that being said, I was just telling, since some of you do know, A-Room is last CCB meeting last week. Our first applicant for micro business got approved up here on Lake Ave. So that's definitely look forward to that thing opening up. We're going to be blowing the canister off that, working hard these next couple of months to really get out what it looks like for that to be a perfectly operating store. So today we're just here to provide you with valuable insights and information about the ongoing debate surrounding rescheduling and descheduling of cannabis at the federal level. This topic 4. Rescheduling and descheduling represent critical topics in the cannabis industry with far-reaching implications for businesses, consumers, and policymakers alike. As we explore these topics, we aim to shed light at the complexities and nuances involved, offering a balanced perspective that considers both the potential benefits and challenges associated with each approach. By the end of this seminar, our goal is for you to have a comprehensive understanding of the arguments for and against rescheduling and descheduling, as well as insights into recent developments in the cannabis industry. Thank you. She knows me so well. All right, so the topic of rescheduling versus descheduling cannabis at the federal level is crucial for anyone involved in or interested in the cannabis industry. This event provides a unique opportunity for us to, 1, gain insight, understand the potential impacts of federal policy changes on your business and the broader industry. Number 2, stay informed. Stay ahead of the curve with the latest developments and insights from industry experts. Number 3, engage in dialogue. Participate in meaningful conversations that shape the future of cannabis regulation. Number 4, expand your knowledge. Learn about the nuances and implications of rescheduling versus descheduling. Number 5, to network, right? Connecting with like-minded individuals and professionals who share your interest in the cannabis industry. And lastly, one of the main things is form your opinion. We're here to point out the facts on this conversation, hoping to provide you with the relevant information to make an informed decision on how you feel, these policy changes best represent your business. One thing that I definitely just want to harp on is the point of this and exactly why, we're even here today, which we'll get into next. But I want everybody to think about how this affects your journey in the cannabis industry. Because, like I said, one of the things I'm going to get into next, the reason why we're doing this specific seminar on this specific topic is, there's some alarming stuff going on. And, with a lot of misinformation, the lines can get blurred. So I really want everybody just to be constantly thinking in the back of your mind, how is this going to affect me and what I want to do in my cannabis journey. So one thing that we adopted from the last A-Room Insight that I love is, I want to get a chance to hear from you guys, right? You guys are going to sit up here, listen to me a bunch, listen to keynotes, but I do want to hear a little bit about where you guys' experiences are and what you know. So for this specific one, I would like to go around the room and either share one piece of preliminary knowledge that you know about the topic, whether it be things you saw on the internet, things you heard on the news. We just want to hear where you are in this topic, or one personal experience with how cannabis descheduling has affected you being scheduled as a scheduled substance. So I'll start off, just kind of something I was referring to, but realistically, 7 months ago, this was completely off my radar. Just being in the rooms that I am privileged to be in and have the education that I do have. This is something that, like I said, was very alarming to me when we actually started thinking about what rescheduling and descheduling does at the federal level. We're taking a state piece of legislation, right? And everything right now that we do in the cannabis industry is focused at a state level. So if we take that federal piece of legislation, that's going to directly impact that piece of state legislation. Either one, descheduling or rescheduling, could have massive implications on the business. I just want to use you as a example, Brandi. Let's say that something comes down the pipeline, you're up, operating perfect, the micro business is going, and then the rescheduling hits. That's something that is very true and serious, as in what implications that can have for your business. The 280E will be going, and I don't want to get too much into this. This is just my personal reason again. 280E will be going, but there's also other things you're gonna have to worry about that are gonna heavily impact your business. So, just once again, as I'm learning about these things, and I'm like, okay, going back to why we're doing this, right? To provide. If I want to provide properly for my community, I need to make sure that these things and these scare factors that I'm learning about, I'm disseminating that also that correct information to the individual around me. So just a little bit on why I called us here today and why this Room Insights is about rescheduling versus descheduling cannabis at the federal level. So we'll just go around the room this way and start with you, bro.
So my name is Steve Vanderwall. I'm the owner and CEO of Bandy's, and I'm actually in the queue right now for a micro business license. I was in the November queue, so any meeting now, I think you should be seeing my name pop up, which I'm pretty excited about. Been in the space for a long time, been operating for many years. I'm really excited because I come from a marketing and e-commerce background, and I really am interested, especially in the rescheduling, and I am really interested in, I'm excited about the 280E tax burden going away, but I also know that there are some implications. I'm sure most people will find out tonight. I think most people think the cannabis industry is just a golden goose and everybody who's operating is rich. And I can tell you right now, that is not the case in the legal market because taxes are high, it's hard to get banking, it's a very financially complicated industry. And with rescheduling and hopefully eventually descheduling, the rescheduling is going to change that. But I'm really interested in being able to take my business and hopefully start to operate in other states. I would love to be able to start shipping. Right now I do primarily delivery all the greater Rochester, which is awesome. But I think in order to really scale the business the way that I want, I'd love to be able to start selling in other states. So I'm really interested in learning more tonight. Appreciate having me.
Elisa?
My name's Elisa. I'm here primarily to be supportive. I don't work in the cannabis industry, but you asked what preliminary information we have on the subject. I've heard you give the talk a lot, so I feel like I have a lot of information, but I'm excited to learn more.
Absolutely. And, what directly affects me will directly affect you. So.
All right. Hi, I'm Ian. I'm Bryce's roommate. Excited to be here. But as far as like rescheduling, descheduling goes, obviously I've heard about New York State legalization, and I think earlier in 2021, 2019, they rescheduled marijuana. I'm not sure, but I have had friends that have had issues with it in other states, and I'm kind of interested to know like where that is on a federal level and a state by state level.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I'm Bryce. I'm a student at the University of Rochester and an intern at Room. So as I'm kind of learning more about the cannabis industry and the more business-esque side of it, I'm kind of enjoying like conversations like this and seeing knowledgeable people talk about topics that may be initially difficult to understand all of the implications of, and just being in a room full of smart people and learning more from them.
My name is Lizzie, and I'm a student in Vanderbilt University, and I'm really new to like this whole industry, and I'm really willing to listen to more and learn more about it.
Thank you.
My name is Shin, also Bryce's roommate. I'm a finance student at the UR, And my background is international, so I'm originally kind of from Japan. My parents are there. My perspective on weed has been kind of like changing over the years, but I kind of got into it younger. At first, it was more just like a dumb kid kind of thing, but I think recently I've seen this other lens behind marijuana because my background is that like it's never been legal wherever I was, but for once I've seen that there are actual like history and medical benefits and a bit of an other side to weed that I'm kind of discovering now.
Yeah.
And I'm also interested in going into consulting. So for me, this is just kind of like for me to study, but also learn from you guys and see. This is kind of like an edge business. I'm not sure if that's correct, but to me, this is kind of like a very new area, and
Absolutely.
I'm very ears open to hear about how this all works and what business looks like in this industry.
Lovely. Lovely. John, you want to or you?
Oh, no, I'm just picking.
I respect that today. I respect that.
So I'm going to say anyone.
Shin.
Shin. So when you were talking, I'm Brandi. I actually, you're saying your family was from Japan, just seeing the legislation change internationally.
Yeah.
And to see, I'm an educator by trade, so when we talk about, I'll get into the reschedule conversation later, but like you said, I will tell you for the first time in history, when Bitcoin came out and people were telling you like, no, get that Bitcoin, but you didn't really understand what was happening. And if you took the time to just kind of listen, you actually made a lot of money. Like I have friends, and there are people who get lost, but let's talk about responsible financials and all of those things. Don't think it's a gold mine, but I think that as an educator, for the first time, I see where young people will actually be on the forefront of the next wave of this industry, from finance to like anything. Like honestly, I'm getting my PhD. I'm looking at why colleges need to reform. RIT is right in our back door. They're one of the leaders in technology. You know that you're going to need technology that supports the actual industry. You can't do that if you're not actually creating an ecosystem of learners to get. We need AI for cannabis. We're going to need educators for cannabis. You're going to need science for cannabis. You're going to need health. You're going to need public health. You're going to need like so many different areas in biology. When I actually started looking at how cannabis, like you said, was used medicinally. And when you actually then get into religion, you see that people probably were using the herb in a way that you didn't even tease. Like they were back in the day, old people using it in teas as like searching, soaking it in, like, they didn't have medicine. So for me to see the gap closing between information by taking away the biases of what allowed you to exist, no longer just smoking pot with your friends. Like, you know what I'm saying? Back in the day, you might have hit the joint with your friend, but times are changing, so it's just been really exciting to be in rooms where people are vulnerable, but also sharing what they bring to the table. You talked about marketing, like e-commerce. That's not going anywhere. Take the word cannabis out, and you know that it's not going anywhere, and it's moving forward. So I'm super excited to be here today.
Hi everyone, my name is Edwin Spencer. I am the CEO and co-owner of Sunlight Financial Group, an accounting, bookkeeping, and consulting business here in Rochester. I'm in cannabis initially as a cannabis accountant, and then got moved into the social equity side. Rescheduling for me, or descheduling for me, first ticket is being a cannabis accountant is the 280E going away. That's huge for the cannabis industry. Like a lot of people, like you said, a lot of people think it's a gold mine. And when you realize the amount of deductions they are not allowed to take at this moment, they're really not making a gold mine. We can talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely, and I know Ms. Precious just walked in, but we are doing, just share a little bit about why we're here today, anything you may know about the topic, rescheduling versus descheduling, or a way that you were impacted by cannabis being scheduled as a schedulable substance. If you'd like to share any insight with us, I know you have so much.
Yes. So, excuse me, sorry, I'm just finishing up with a cold, but I would say as far as impact for me, my thought process at this point is, who's going to regulate and what that looks like. So there's quite a bit of concern when it comes to descheduling and rescheduling. And I'm just really eager to see the suggestions on who's going to regulate, whether that be the DEA or the USDA, and the avenues of what that's going to be, those outcomes. I think that's the main key when it comes to understanding descheduling and rescheduling. So just kind of interested in finding out like what those solutions would be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys all very much for that. It's always good for me to be able to just get some insight on who's in the room, what you guys know, and where we're at as we work through this topic, right? This is a new topic for some of us, a familiar one for others, and like I said, I just like to gauge the room to get a sense of where we are. So, as we go into everything, I just got the agenda for the day. So I am going to be starting off with some definitions of the two, along with some examples. I like to bridge that gap and make that complete circle so you guys can get a legitimate example of what that looks like in different areas of the industry currently. History, one thing that we think is very important is we have to always realize and be able to recognize where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So I want to talk a little bit about that. We're then going to segue into our keynote, starting off with Mr. Edwin Spencer on the pros and cons of rescheduling. Then going into our second keynote, Brandi Hester Harrell with descheduling pros and cons. We're going to do a little bit of an interactive activity. I want to get you guys involved, test some of the knowledge we're going to be talking about. We want to wrap it up with the closing and let people get a chance to network for a little bit before we all head out and enjoy the rest of our night. So that being said, I will just hop right into it. So before I get really into the definitions, I do just want to take the moment to, once again, point out how dynamic cannabis is in nature. Since the passing of the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, up until now, we're saying probably about 54 years, there's been a lot of ups and downs in the industry. Just some fun, lighthearted stuff, as well as some information building. I wanted to do a quick 3-round show of hands. I got some trivia questions. If you know the answer, raise your hand. I'll call on you, and I'll give the answer I got. So to start off, who knows when the first state legalized cannabis? A year in state. I'm looking for a year in state.
Say 2014.
In state?
In state, is it Colorado?
Good guess, good guess. Any other guesses? No? So.
Wait.
2012, California.
No, good guess though, good guess. So California became the first state to legalize medical marijuana in 1996 with Proposition 215. Next one. Who knows when cannabis was legalized in New York? I know we should know this one. In New York, Brandi, you want to blurt it out?
April 2021.
March, but 2021 for sure. There we go. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then lastly, who knows how many states are currently legalized for either medical or recreational use? And this one even took me by surprise. It's 38, bro. Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I went right on the money. So yes, 38 states have legalized for medical use. Of those 38 states, 23 states, including Washington, D.C., have legalized for recreational use. So, just once again, I just want to point out how dynamic things are, because if we're going back those 54 years, right, that was at the inception of the Controlled Substances Act. Within the past, let's say 20 to 30 years, things just keep going up and down. So, just want to preface that to say with, that's how this presentation is going to go. It's going to be the ups and downs, how things have been going, what's going on, what's going on. So hopping right into these definitions, we're going to start off with rescheduling. Rescheduling refers to the reclassification of cannabis from its current Schedule 1 status to a lower schedule, such as a Schedule 2, 3, 4, or 5 substance in the CSA. CSA stands for Controlled Substances Act, like I previously mentioned. We will get into that a little bit later in the history, but right now we're just going over these definitions. When we're talking about scheduling, right, everybody's like, well, what puts them in what schedule, right? What does that criteria look like? That is something I wanted to go over as well. There's a couple criteria that they consider when they're going through these scheduling processes. So the first one we have is accepted medical use, right? So a drug must have currently accepted medical use in the United States, and they take that into consideration when they're trying to figure out whether it's a Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 drug. Its potential for abuse. The drug's relative potential for abuse compared to other controlled substances is also taken into consideration when they're trying to figure out what schedule. Another one is safety and dependence, the extent to which the drug poses a risk to public health and its potential to cause physical or psychological dependence is also another risk, I guess we can say, or thought process as they're putting into these Schedule 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5s. And lastly is international treaties, just ensuring that compliance with international drug treaties are withheld as they're going through these things. So, those are kind of what it looks like to be placed within these schedules. But then, still the other side. What are the schedules, right? I just keep saying 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I have some examples and kind of the blanket definitions for what they say these schedules have to kind of comply with in order to be put in these. So for Schedule 1, these are considered drugs with no accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. Things like heroin, ecstasy, sadly currently cannabis. Schedule 2 drugs are drugs with high potential for abuse but accepted medical use. Things like oxycodone, that sort of thing. Schedule 3 drugs are drugs with moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependence. Things like anabolic steroids. Schedule 4 drugs are drugs with low potential for abuse and a low risk of dependence. Things like Xanax and Valium. And then lastly, our Schedule 5 drugs are drugs with lower potential for abuse than Schedule 4 drugs and contain limited quantities of certain narcotics. Examples, certain cough prescriptions with less than 200 milligrams of codeine within them. So before I move on to the definitions for descheduling, I want to open the floor. Are there any questions about that information I just presented there, about the definitions of rescheduling and kind of the things that, some of the additional definitions that assist you in defining rescheduling? Any questions about that? Great.
Well, just like I add on about when thinking about like the scheduling, there is a point in which the pharmacists become very important, or the doctor, you need a script. So I think the scheduling, when you think about like the hierarchy of this, I always think of this is the level where it goes from the doctor to like the person or whatever. So when you're thinking about that, that made it a little easier. If you're like me, I thought of the meter of, do I need a doctor for this, or can I go in and talk to a healthcare representative? And I think it just was pretty interesting, but that spectrum made it not seem as severe. So if you're in your mind like, oh, there's so many levels to this, just think of the doctor. Each time it gets less and less restrictive of what is needed. In that way, it kind of helps me remember like what the hierarchy of needs. I guess.
Thank you very much for that, Brandi. So our next step onto the definition for descheduling. So descheduling involves removing cannabis from the CSA schedules entirely, treating it similar to alcohol and tobacco. Cannabis will no longer be classified as a controlled substance, eliminating federal criminal penalties associated behind it, and states would have full autonomy to regulate cannabis without any federal interference. Like I said, I like to always tie the knot, complete that full circle. What does that look like? Some things that's already been descheduled. We have alcohol, which is currently regulated by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. Something that Ms. Lovely Precious says all the time is, this cannabis industry right now, let's think about, let's say, 20, 50, 60 maybe years back when all those bootleggers were doing the same thing. Alcohol was a controlled substance to an extent. They didn't have that same terminology, but it was something that was heavily regulated, and they didn't essentially just want it being on the streets. We go now to 2024, we can get a beer at most likely any gas station we pull up to. So, that's just, like I said, a way I like to tie that knot completely on what cannabis descheduling could look like. Tobacco as well, same thing. Tobacco is currently regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and as well as the TTB, the same thing that alcohol is regulated by. And the hemp bill, the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018, also known as the Farm Bill, which descheduled hemp, as long as it has less than 0.3 content of cannabis, of THC concentration within it. Just like I said, as I like to tie the knot, complete that full circle transaction of what it looks like for examples, as well as the definitions on both sides. So and then just to conclude, leading out of this section of the seminar, two things we need to take with us is rescheduling, still marked as a potentially harmful substance and regulated by some sort of federal agency, and descheduling is removing completely from the scheduling list, like those 5 scheduling lists I just mentioned, saying that it doesn't necessarily need to be in there for any sort of specific fact. One specific thing I want to point out before we move on from this is the understanding of these concepts is crucial as we move further on into the seminar. So once again, I want to open up the floor for any questions anybody may have. We can add some added clarity before we head on into the history portion of this. Anybody have any questions, comments?
I've always wondered how alcohol is not on a controlled substances, because is there some medicinal value to alcohol minus hand sanitizer? I guess I don't really know.
At a certain level, there is some form of medicinal use for alcohol.
Really?
Yeah.
I would say they probably argue the red wine is good for your heart thing.
I don't know, right? But I do know there is like a certain, I don't know what that
Level
is.
to it.
Yeah.
With that in mind, what is the medical beneficial value of cigarettes?
There we go. Now we're having a conversation with
Yeah.
you.
It's the leading cause of cancer. It kills more people than just about anything. And you're looking at a substance that hasn't killed anybody, comparing it to something like tobacco. Tobacco has killed more people, but it's not a controlled substance. You know,
Right.
I mean,
And you
it's
also have to look
regulated,
at the
but it's not a
reasons
controlled
of
substance.
why cannabis was put on the Controlled Substance Act in a very, Yeah.
Let's segue right in.
for sure.
So yeah, perfect. Great question, Steve. Thank you for that. All right, so next up is we got history. Like I said, I'm gonna be going over the overview of the CSA of 1970, effects of Schedule I categorization, and recent developments in the cannabis industry as far as legislative policy goes. So starting with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. So this was essentially just I think they call it a title within a larger overarching act, which is called the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. This act of 1970 was a major piece of legislation initiative used to address the growing drug problem within the United States. It aimed to regulate the manufacturing, importation, possession, use, and distribution of certain substances. People say the act was needed because there was a rising drug use and social unrest within the 1960s and 1970s, and public concern, over this rising increase on the drug use obviously provided for some sort of issue for that presidential candidate in that year. The Nixon administration thought that a cohesive national strategy was needed to address these drug-related issues effectively. Like I said, this was enacted in 1970 under President Richard Nixon, and it was part of Nixon's broader War on Drugs initiative, marking a significant shift in U.S. drug policy. Some key components of this act, like I said, they broke it up into 3 separate titles. Title I provided funding for prevention and rehabilitation program to combat drug use. Title II created the Controlled Substances Act, which introduced drug classification systems, Schedules 1 to 4. That's what I'm talking about specifically here right now. And Title III of this act enhanced law enforcement capabilities to tackle drug-related crimes more effectively. One thing I just want to point out, before we head into the next part of this, is the impact of the Nixon administration on the Controlled Substances Act. So I'll just want to start off with this wonderful quote I got from a great friend of mine. I don't want to put anybody out there, but this quote, I was like, wow, this sums it up. Everything I want to say right now is perfect. So, I'll just start. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalize both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. So when we start talking about why the Controlled Substances Act was created, very plainly, if I'm not mistaken, that was by the president himself, correct?
Correct.
He told us why. Like I said, it was to be the president of the United States and to try to take away somebody's First Amendment or freedom of speech is, you'll get debarred, blah, 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 do everything. But being strategic, I guess we can say, the Nixon administration devised a plan to get around that, still enacting the pain points that they wanted to and creating a whole lot more trickle effect, like I said, these past 54 years since 1970 when this was passed. So, just to tie that all in, that's where the scheduling criteria came from. And, it's always been a massive, especially in the recent years, a massive question to everybody why cannabis is scheduled as a Schedule I substance. Once again, reiterating, that means it has no medical use and it's highly addictive. When we start actually, I don't want to get too much into that because I know they're going to cover that, but this is something that we should feel passionate about because when you have kind of conversation from President Nixon on exactly what happened in this area, that was an on-record quote that he said. Like I said, it just kind of points out everything. And then as we start talking about the effects of Schedule I categorization, it makes everything a lot more clear on why things happened the way they did. So before I go on to the effects, does anybody have any questions about the history of the Controlled Substances Act of 1970? I know I laid a big piece down on you, so please feel free to ask.
So in terms of the CSA, did that bar research on cannabis, like in a high level?
Yes, so that's a point that I'm going to talk to next. But essentially, to an extent, it was already kind of confirmed that no medical benefit would come out of cannabis. So it would just kind of, the word I'm looking for, non-credited institutions, I feel like would kind of pick cannabis more up than the private. I know Brandy's going to help me out on this, but
I'll just tap you in, but Mississippi, the University of Mississippi, in 1960s, 70s, they actually have been doing research since then. Which is why I say I feel like a room is always before the time, because when you think about like being before the time, they were before the time because they went to the president and said, "Hey, we want to do some research." But what they did was align the research with the negative part, which is like yellow journalism and talking about like how bad it was. So they never really looked at the medicinal. They just kind of looked at the science. Currently, it's only scientific research out there, and it's more whatever the DEA was giving them and what they had growing. But they do have research ag programs in the South. That's kind of crazy. Where it's least legal, like in terms of. So it kind of made me realize, like, if those with power have power. And come on, how did a school like the University of Mississippi, you know what I'm saying, get the president to allow them to do this covert research that allowed them to support the policies of America? Who friend was that? Who just said somebody's son came to their dad and was like, "Talk to your friend." I mean, that's my opinion. That's not a fact. So let's just make sure we say that. I don't know if that is true, but that's how I felt just because of how information was disseminated. But it's crazy because now colleges are trying to figure out should they do the research or not. How is that even a real question? Like, so it's been interesting. Thanks, Chad, for letting me tag me.
absolutely. Any other questions on that? Clarification? Bryce?
Was this the first law, kind of legislating cannabis use, or was there a law prior to that that was kind of base level, just like that?
Yeah, I don't think there was anything necessarily cannabis focused. I think, like I said, they're pushing their agenda, saying, okay, we're going to tackle the massive drug problem, but their specific agenda was to kind of police, the blacks and the far left as far as the war. But prior to this, I wouldn't know personally. Honestly, I would reach out to anybody in the room. You guys know, but as far as I know, I do think this was the first piece of major legislation for drug enforcement in the United States. Yeah.
It pretty much created the DEA.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah. How long after the CSA was created was the DEA formed? Was that like?
I think it was like months.
Hand in hand.
Yeah, I think it was months. Yeah.
Pretty much went hand in hand. They were, when they talked about enforcement, the DEA was created for that enforcement wing of the controlled substance.
Think about it like MRTA. As soon as MRTA passed, they had to create the OTA.
Yeah.
So whatever direction they go with or however this goes, soon after there's going to be some type of another alphabet soup created to support whatever it is because they need some regulatory.
Yep.
That's kind of the only difference between this legacy and that is regulatory space operating in oversight.
And then ultimately, that's the question that I had as far as the regulatory, like who's going to regulate? Will it be the DEA,
Right.
or will it be the USDA?
Yeah.
Right, because
And
it's
then-
an ag crop.
Exactly. And what does that look like? And that's the difference.
Yeah, so we were having a conversation
Yeah,
about that.
for sure.
How much that would change it. So yeah, like I said, very important topic to be talking about today. So
I'm sorry. USDA, they oversee hemp? Who oversees
isn't the ag?
The ag.
It is ag, yes.
Agriculture, and that's what's kind of crazy because it's the same plant, so they can't figure out.
Yeah.
It's the same actual plant, so they can't figure out.
And that's really that's more of an argument of why they would want to say, well, we are regulating it already. Yeah, it is.
But it's not the same. That's what somebody older said right now.
all right, so just going in, that Schedule 1 categorization. So we all know, there were kind of devastating effects of this Schedule 1 categorization in a number of different kind of ways. Starting off with research restrictions, which are a fantastic question. There wasn't a lot of socially accepted use of it. I feel like this is one of those things that's like, oh, if you're doing research on cannabis, you need to be doing it in your basement of your house, because if your institution finds out that you're, trying to figure out cannabis research and all that, it just was one of those things that maybe could potentially debar a doctor, if I'm not mistaken, correct, Brandi? If they find out, oh, Dr. So-and-so is doing cannabis stuff, he doesn't know anything, he's not, accredited anymore to be a doctor.
And there's still even research restrictions right now. You have doctors who are going throughout the state, and they're being a resource to cultivators, and they work for prestigious universities, and they're definitely not able to say that they're helping them because cannabis is associated as hemp and then cannabis THC. Yeah. So there's definitely a huge issue when it comes to the schedule and the categorization of it.
Yeah, it's still experimental. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Legal ramifications, this is kind of something that, I feel like it's just kind of been apparent ever since. We all probably in some way or another know somebody or been directly affected by somebody that's got in some trouble for having cannabis on them. Kind of these, when you start talking about these ramifications that they were, implementing on some of these individuals who got caught with minuscule amounts of cannabis, it's really crazy. Like, you would think, these individuals committed a capital one murder. There's honestly people who got out for murder before people who are in prison for cannabis at the federal level. So, just when you start thinking about what that looks like and why that happened, I would say, sadly, the Nixon administration got exactly what they wanted. There's even some stats that I wanted to pull, but I couldn't find the exact one. But I want to say around from the time of 1970, so I think it was around 2010, 2014, there was a 700% increase in those individuals in prison. So, that's, when you start talking about data and tracking the metrics, they succeeded, sadly. They succeeded. And that's why we're where we are now, fighting for all this social reform, because they succeeded. And, a lot of our fathers, moms, granddads, nephews, uncles were in prison for this plant that, was criminalized on a massive scale. Sad. Social stigma, kind of just on top of that entire legal ramifications. How many times where it's like, you're like somewhere and it's like, we got a table that smells like cigarettes, a table that smells like weed, and a table that smells like liquor. Like, which table is going to call it out 10 times out of 10? The table that smells like weed, sadly. When it's like, when you talk about, the social ramifications of that, it's like, that doesn't really make sense, because this is another plant. Like we just had to mention, alcohol kills people. Cigarettes kill people. And it's like, when you start thinking about cannabis doesn't kill people. Cannabis brings people together. Cannabis makes people laugh. So, when you start thinking about social impacts and everything, you got grandmas, grandpas, they hate cannabis, and that's all they've ever known. So, it's really just kind of that ground level implementation of cannabis is bad. And a lot of that was done throughout the DARE program. Reefer madness, making cannabis the highest evil of all evils. Right from the devil's backyard, essentially. The devil's lettuce is where I'm pretty sure that term was coined. And then lastly, just the impact on the industry. This is something that kind of, I like to get specifically passionate about this, because it's like, kind of referring back to, let's put ourselves in the shoes of all those bootleggers maybe 50, 70 years ago. Those families now are literal millionaires. The Jack Daniels family, Tito's families, blah, 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 all those families. So let's then, once again, put our...
I was thinking of the black man, sorry. Pressure 2 is it?
Ciroc?
No, come on, Pressure.
Oh, Poppy Van?
Come on.
From, no,
Wow,
I'm
y'all
sorry.
really carved the vote,
Yeah.
man.
Well, blur it out.
There's too many names. I'm sorry. I couldn't think about it. I'm sorry.
But when you just start to think about some of like what we've lost, we could have had millionaires, socioeconomic equity families that were taking advantage of these monies from the cannabis industry, and then this is an entire $1 trillion industry, to my numbers guy, that we've been missing out on for the past 54 years. So when you just devastation really is like, that's all this slide was about really, is I want to talk about the devastation that we face economically, socially, culturally, etc. Any other lead that you can think of from cannabis being scheduled as a Schedule I substance. It's really just detrimental, and that's why I feel like a lot of the, just kind of getting off topic here, but that's why a lot of the CBOs, community-based organizations that are out here doing the work today. So I feel like it's so important, because we're literally trying to right the wrongs that our ancestors faced tens and tens of years ago. So before I move on to the next one, are there any questions, concerns, comments about these terms I just went over? No? We're done on it? Perfect. And then lastly, I just wanted to end up on this. I don't want to get too much into this at all, because I know this is where really going to do a lot of their eating at, but recent developments in cannabis policy. So starting at state level changes, like you just talked about, right? We're 38 states in, baby. That's a good start. We're missing 12, not even a good start. We're almost to the finish line, realistically. We're about 12 states away. 38 states at a state level with legalized cannabis to some aspect is a big win, I think, especially when we start talking about everything that happened those 54 years ago and, the trail a lot of these states have taken. And trust, each state has their journey. I know Brandi can definitely speak to this, but it is not easy to get some of these things passed at a state level, and it takes a lot of lobbying, a lot of policy, a lot of meeting with people, a lot of elbow rubbing, that sort of thing. So that's definitely good to see. Some state level changes, recent developments in policy. Federal developments, we have two that I specifically want to key on. But the MORE Act was introduced by the U.S. House of Representatives in July of 2019, and that stands for the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. Don't want to go into that too much. I know Brandi probably yell at me because she might want to talk about it, but I'm going to leave that alone. And the next one is the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, introduced by the U.S. Senate in July of 2021. So, these are both fairly newer pieces of legislation introduced. So it's just, like I said, really good to see recently things are going to change. Things have been changing. There's no doubt in my mind things will change, and we will get to that point that we want to be in. But as of now, we're still in criminalization period. And the fact of the matter right now is, Brandi was literally just telling this before, but the 500,000 jobs that exist in the nation right now, that's legal cannabis at state levels are all illegal jobs. And that's the point blank period fact of it is. At a federal level, these jobs are all legal jobs no matter what the states say. Sometimes state laws and federal laws can kind of clash at it. Luckily, nothing's got too serious to get us to that point so far, but point blank period, these are illegal jobs. So definitely good to see that that's still advancing. Advancements in research, just like the question, some specific ones I wanted to bring up. I don't want to get too much into these because this is just a lot of, research jargon, but in January 2017, the health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids, the current state of evidence and recommendations for research was released. The Epidiolex clinical trials, a CBD-based medication, was approved by the FDA in June of 2018 for treatment of seizures, for two rare forms of seizures and forms of epilepsy and PTSD studies. A review published in Neurotherapeutics in 2015 explored the potential cannabinoid as an effective treatment for anxiety disorders, including PTSD-related symptoms. So, as we just started to talk about, the advancements in research, people are doing the research on it. People are seeing the actual benefits of cannabis as they should. That's a great thing to see. And then lastly, before I wrap up my portion and not take a seat, is public opinion and advocacy, right? I wanted to end on this because this is why we're all here, right? This is a recent development. I feel like even to have people being able to speak about it openly within the last, 10 years is kind of a big win. We all know that, there's still people who can't be as open as they want about it because realistically, there's still a social stigma attached to the plant. There's fantastic people who can't be as open as they want about it. So even to the fact that we're in here today able to have these open discussions about the policy changes, about everything that's going on is a massive development. And as long as, people keep gathering in a room to talk about what's really important, we'll keep going in the right direction. So that is about everything for me as far as me speaking. Before I go on to Edwin, is there anything that I just finished up about? Anybody has questions about? I just did a kind of a high-level overview, like I said in the beginning, taking you from where we were, where we are, and where we're going. And then to keynote, we'll get into the nitty-gritty. But before I take a seat, is there anything, comments, questions, concerns, emotional outburst? Good? Perfect.
Like Chair said, my name is Edwin Spencer, CEO of Sunlight Consulting, Sunlight Financial Group. As an accountant, cannabis was like one of those meal tickets for accountants because you have a chance to establish that cannabis premium, as they would say, on everything that comes across your table with cannabis attached to it. That was majorly because of the 280E, as everybody kind of heard tonight talking about the 280E. It came out in 1973, 3 years after the Controlled Substance Act was passed. It made cannabis, any drug that Schedule 1 and 2, if you were selling those drugs, you were not allowed to take any deductions below cost of goods sold. So anybody knows anything about accounting, cost of goods sold is just what goes into bringing that product to the table. So that was the only deduction that people were allowed was cost of goods sold. And technically that was illegal under the Constitution, but they kind of stuck that around there because one gentleman who was a diligent bookkeeper as well as a drug dealer actually beat the IRS in court in 1972. And he didn't have to pay any taxes on his cannabis or his cocaine or anything that he had sold. And that's when the 280E was coming out. So it's really a punitive act that came out. So by rescheduling, we can get rid of that punitive law. And it will allow for cannabis businesses to not be taxed. Right now, they're currently taxed like 70% of their net income, even though because it's based on their gross receipts, they still got their security, their employees, everything else that will come out of that. And they will none of that's allowed as deductions. So they're literally being taxed on their net income at like a 70% rate as compared to another industry who's making the same amount of money. So that's going to be one benefit that comes out of the rescheduling. Another benefit is going to be, as we discussed tonight, research. Right now, nobody can do research on cannabis. Israel's been doing research on cannabis for 80 years. Like other states, other countries have been doing research on cannabis for a long time, and it's not been allowed in the United States because of the Controlled Substance Act. But this is going to allow more research, so colleges can now get funding because most colleges are federally funded. So now they can get funding to support their research, and we can start learning more and more about this plant. That has a huge effect on our body because every one of us have a cannabinoid system. And where do we get cannabinoids from? The cannabis plant. So majority of people are, cannabinoid deficient, if you would say, because this plant has been illegal for so long. The next pro for rescheduling is going to go with banking and financial services. We have a few banks that will allow cannabis businesses to place their money in them and hold them and to pay bills, but they're not eligible for any form of financing or loans, which makes investment really hard because nobody wants to put money into a business that banks don't trust. Also, POS systems. Like you're not able to use PayPal, you're not able to use Stripe, you're not able to use Chime, you're not able to use all these services. So it makes cannabis a highly cash business. And that makes it a very unsafe business because everybody knows these dispensaries have tons of cash on hand. Because it's a highly cash business, there's tons of cash on hand. They're more opposed to being robbed, more opposed to being broken into. So these are businessmen and women who are trying to support their families and they're being, broken into. Guess what? I can't even write that off on my taxes. I took a loss. Something happened. I can't even write it off on my taxes. They won't allow those deductions. They won't allow those safeguards. Another program will come along the line was something that I found was interesting when I was doing some research for this was consistency with state law. Because when you kind of think about it, even though states have legalized cannabis, on a federal level, there's still a gray area business. They're still operating as a illicit market, if you would say, because it's illegal on a federal basis. So it's kind of like seeing it from a different perspective of that higher up, like, oh, as we got legal, all the mom and pop shops or the people who sold weed on the corner have to kind of go away and become legalized. It's like when the federal takes over, it might be a whole other set of regulations, but it would make consistency across state lines. So like if you go to California, you're able to carry this much weed on you. If you go to Oregon, you maybe carry this much, Colorado this much, New York this much. You have a kind of consistency across the board. But then we're going to get into some of the cons of rescheduling. Rescheduling to a Schedule 3 is not complete legalization. So cannabis will still be regulated by the DEA and FDA. It will still be considered illegal on a federal level. There's potential market disruption because now when you're looking at it on Schedule 3, you're looking more of it as a medication. So now you're going to have more prescription written for just to be able to receive cannabis. So some people are maybe using it on a recreational level now, getting it from your dispensary. It may be the pharmacies being the only who can sell cannabis. And you have to go to your Rite Aid to get your cannabis, so that could disrupt the entire market. You have all these mom and pop shops, you have all these different owners of different businesses, processors. It will be regulated where only a medical facility can actually grow, process, and sell cannabis. Another thing I didn't think about either was international treaty obligations. So as the United States starts to consider rescheduling cannabis from a Schedule 1, it has to kind of like stop and look at its treaties with other countries and how they treat cannabis and how that could be affected on a global international level. And another big one is what we're all worried about. And this is like Chad alluded to with the rescheduling is the uncertainty. There's going to be a lot of litigation. There's going to be a lot of comments periods. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits popping up from both sides of the court, from people who don't want to see cannabis reform all the way to people who are looking for a complete descheduling. So this is as these regulations start to roll out, because as they do everything in this country, they'll make it, they'll say, okay, it's too Schedule 2 or Schedule 3. Okay, now we got to create this regulatory body. Now we got to create regulations. Now we got to decide what's going to be allowed from the state levels, what we're going to keep from the state regulations, what we're going to disallow from the state regulations, what's going to change. When all this starts to happen, there's going to be a huge amount of legal things popping up, because you're going to see tons of cannabis businesses alone, like, hey, you know, you can't change this on us. This has been our industry for the last 10 years, you know, and that's going to be fighting back. So there's going to be a lot of litigation going back and forth as far as that go. And then also, this is election year. You know, if they are to reschedule it before the end of the year, before the election is decided, you don't know what new leadership is going to do as far as regulations go, as far as anything changing in cannabis. You know, we can end up with a new president. We're going to end up with it. We could possibly end up with an entirely new Congress. You know.
Well, just something I want to add is, you know, on top of what you just said, uncertainty, and then I don't know if you guys picked up, if cannabis is rescheduled by the end of this year, and that's not like a maybe, like, this is why I wanted to have this event, because that's a very high possibility. You know, not for sure, but that's a possibility that by the beginning of 2025, cannabis can be rescheduled to a Schedule 2 or 3 substance, and it can literally change everything. All the work, you know, everybody in this room has been doing to build out their, you know, whether it's clients, yourself, friends, family, loved ones, can literally be changed with the snap of a finger before this year's out. Which is why I felt like this was such an important topic for us to be having discussion.
So that, and one other pro that I did think of that I wanted to add to it was insurance for some medical patients. With rescheduling, it could allow them to actually be able to pay for some of their cannabis with their health insurance. So that would be beneficial to our elderly who use cannabis as medication, and we all know our fixed budget, and they're literally paying for their medication out of their pocket. So that would be one other benefit for that. But is there any other questions about rescheduling?
Actually, yeah. Could I ask a bit about like the specifics of how rescheduling would affect like the finance? Like, you're talking about banks and how right now they're hesitant to give out loans, services. Do you think like just rescheduling is like, you say Schedule 3?
Yeah.
That would radically change how businesses in marijuana industry
by removing cannabis from the 280E, because with it being on the 280E, there's a lot of tax implications, and then it makes cannabis businesses at risk businesses to be a part. Like, so they're really at risk because they could be running everything properly, right? But if they didn't do their cost of goods sold right, or if the IRS decided just to disallow deduction, they could be facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax bills. You know, so for a bank to finance a company like that with that much, you know, risk at hand financially, is a lot more riskier. So you tend to see less financing. You tend to see less investors. Most millionaires and billionaires don't invest in cannabis. You know, you don't see Mark Zuckerberg with a cannabis dispensary right now. You don't see Elon Musk with a cannabis, strand right now, because they shy away from this industry because of all the financial risk and implications that go on. I mean, ourselves, as we work with Bloom and just using POS systems, we don't touch any plant products. We don't handle any cannabis funds, but just being cannabis adjacent, we can't use certain mini POS systems. Like where they're literally telling you right there, nope, look at your website, we can't use you. You know, like you can't use the POS systems. So like I said, that makes it a heavily cash industry. With cash, heavy cash side, when you make transactions over $5,000 to $10,000, now you have extra reporting you have to do with banking, you have extra reporting you have to do with IRS. It's just a lot more financial hurdles when it comes with cannabis being on the schedule.
Yeah, and a follow-up question to that. So cannabis industry is like mostly cash-based. Like, what's that implication to, like, from the business side, leveraging, financial assets and being able to upscale? I'm sure that would like probably hinder.
It's the biggest hinder for most cannabis industries, because, like I said, it's hard to get investments, hard to get financing, so it's hard to scale. Like, hey, maybe I need to build out the other side of my dispensary. Maybe I need to build out the other side of I need to buy more land for my cannabis grow to grow more plants. Well, how do you get that land? If you don't have the money on hand, you got to finance it. Well, you can't see financing. Oh, maybe I get an investor. Oh, investors don't want to touch cannabis because they don't want their money tied up in the 280. You know, so that's one of the biggest implications I see of rescheduling. That the only major pro of it is going to be for the industry is the financial side. The major thing that's going to benefit the industry is the financial side. But like we said, we have so much uncertainty with all the other hurdles that may come in that it might not balance itself out.
I have a question. Might be a little in the weeds, but I've never really got a solid answer to this. I think you can help me. So I'm going to be applying for a microbusiness. I am applying for a microbusiness. If I get my license, we're going to be cultivating all of our own cannabis, manufacturing all of our own edibles. To what extent are from a cultivation perspective, my lights, my utilities, my nutrients, all the stuff involved in cultivating the cannabis? Is that all cost of goods sold?
That's all cost of goods sold. So that's where bookkeeping in cannabis gets heavy, because you need somebody who's paying attention. You need your employees clocking in and out of your transactions. You need this it's to the point where you almost need a separate building that all this stuff goes on that touches the plant, and a separate building that doesn't touch the plant. So that way we understand what these expenses are compared to these expenses. All the employees that touch the plant stay over there. Employees that don't touch the plant, you stay over here. In a sense, because you got everything that goes into that plant, nutrient, soil, seed, lighting, track your electricity bill, track your water, that brings the plant to bear. And when you get to your processing side, all the heat, whatever solvents you may use or anything for extraction, all that goes into in that process. The employees actually doing that, that's tax write-off. All that gets tracked in your cost of goods sold. That's where you would need a good cost accountant to really sit down, like manufacturing companies use for the track what goes into making a machine part or making a radio, what makes an iPhone. They track those off into the cost of goods sold. So you definitely got to track that. We looking at touch that plant up until it's distributed, sold or distributed.
So if I was to, let's say raise $500,000 and it all goes to building out the facility, is that what's the difference? I guess
build out of the facility, not necessarily we're going to cost of goods sold, but the process of growing and processing the plant into a finished product, that would go into cost of goods sold.
Can I write off my lights and my tables and my HVAC systems?
You can write off the lights. Most likely, system goes into growing, but not so much as the full facility. It's really like a percentage base.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope. You almost have to, like I said, you almost have to create a separate building for certain things because then everything in that building would be written off. But it's like a percentage base still of how much of that is being written off. You still got to be tracked a certain way because at any time the IRS can challenge it and say, nah, we don't allow this percentage of this, and now your tax bill just went up that much more.
I'll say, even to add on to what, both those questions and what Edwin is saying is a lot of the successful operators that I know, one, they have, incredibly diversified investments, obviously whether, they have some rental properties here, this business over there, this business over there. So when we start talking about leveraging, they don't have to take out a loan on their actual business. If anything, like Edwin's saying, their parent company owns the building that owns the equipment that they use, and it's all kind of leased out, which is then going into my next one is there's a lot of different, just finance. There's a lot of strategic ways to go about things to kind of make them where they work for you. But that's exactly why you want a fantastic tax guy like Edwin on your team to be able to, figure out some of those strategies and how to keep your money in your pockets. Because I feel like, even what Steve was saying at the beginning, people think, how can you make $1 million? If you get in this industry, you will make money, but the biggest issue is keeping that money in your pockets.
Cannabis, because I feel like the 280 started the cannabis premium.
Yeah.
It literally started the cannabis premium because that's the federal government taking the first step is we're going to tax you more because you're operating in this space, and it became the norm across cannabis where every other, the marketer, the legal, the finance, the packaging, they charge more because it's in the cannabis space. So it makes it harder on the cannabis industry entrepreneur, so it's not like a lot of entrepreneurs kind of shy away from it because they're like, wow, that's risky. It's considered one of those high risk industries. So that's all I have.
Great job.
Now to introduce Miss Brandi Hester Harrell, M.E.D. She yelled at me already.
Hello. My name is Brandi. I am one half of Entertaining and Elevating with Cannabis. Our goal is to reimagine consumption through making sure we not only just educate the consumer, but we elevate. So a part of the work that we do is making sure we create experiences in our community. Proud of been to some of our events and spaces, Science and Cannabis Symposium. We had an initiative called Mature and Inform. I think that the work that we do always centers education. So Chad, thank you for having me here. I'm an educator by trade. Before I get into my points, it was a couple of things. I know I'm over there taking notes that I want to address. First, you didn't talk about this, Edwin, but I actually heard this at an event a couple of weeks ago. When we think about rescheduling from a medical patient, I'm also a patient. So when we think about it from a patient perspective, right now, you see I have this little case and it locks it up and it makes it safe to travel. But right now, technically, if I got pulled over, even with the car, it's that gray area of what you can't really figure out, right? So you can be considered trafficking going from New York to Jersey or New York to Pennsylvania, or maybe you're a college kid and you were, had a little bag of weed and you went, but you were a patient. So I say all of those things to say that rescheduling would begin to have that conversation and dialogue, really protecting patients. From a patient perspective, I did see them really centered. I have started reading the document. It is very dense, but it's important because regardless, we know that this is going to impact us. Something else that came up was about, sorry, I had to pull this up. It was about the taxes, not taxes. It was coming up about the amendment about can the federal government, that gray area, how did you get there? There's currently an amendment that allows them not to spend DEA funds to enforce state regulation. It is not clear that if it is rescheduled, if that would apply to the larger picture. So what does that actually mean? Ancillary businesses such as taxes or insurance, or maybe you're adjacent to cannabis, you might not, consulting, you might not be able to work in this state to state type of thing because it technically will still be illegal. So I just wanted to start there because a lot of it is the nuances of words. If you're a lawyer, you would know that, boy, and or can change a whole conversation really quick in how we move. So when I started thinking about descheduling, I knew when I first started this conversation, I was like, wait, what? I had to actually sit down and take a moment because it is a big thing. And ultimately, as a business owner, the goal is to make money. You do want to make money. That is a real thing. So I do agree that we need to begin to have the conversation in a financially fiscal way. And rescheduling does do that. I'm not going to take that away from it. But what I can't also know is that when the first thing you saw when I stood up here is that I'm a Black woman. I don't get to walk into a room any other way. And when I think about Rochester specifically, 1 in 3 Black men in Rochester have been arrested. So if you are a Black person who are African American in Rochester, and you stand in a room with 20 of your family members, it's likely that at least 5 of them have been arrested for cannabis and also low-level cannabis charges. That's uncomfortable. I can't unknow that. So because I can't unknow that, when we talk about the long-term effects, I have to be realistic about what is happening. And then I started researching. It scared me to know the leader of the free world actually intentionally hurt the community that I'm from. And when we talk about what descheduling does, a pro, is that it begins to restore the harm. Because if right now federally is rescheduled, it will not release any of the prisoners who are in jail for cannabis. I'm not talking about they had any other drugs. I'm saying that in their car, they had cannabis. And during the legislations of Nixon and Reagan, they were harsh on crime, harsh on the war on drugs. Some people got 20 years for about a pound of weed. That doesn't even make any sense. So they're still in jail serving life sentences. Actually met a man, his whole family had a real estate portfolio of over $20 million. They were unable, they end up, of course, getting caught with marijuana, no guns, no other things. They're serving a total life sentence of 55 years in jail. They owned $20 million in real estate, so you know the government's qualified. I say that to say, what did that do to their family? What did that do to access to education? You know that if the family makes more money, you live in the neighborhoods where the schools are better. If you live in the schools that are better, you're likely to go to college. It's just a different type of conversation. So I think I can't unknow that to restore harm needs to happen, and that is the beginning. When we started looking at this conversation, it talked about single parent homes and pulling out the family. So when you talk about what does that look like to restore home, it said that African Americans make up 32% of the population. However, 74% of us actually were incarcerated. Wait, what? When you put that number in your mind to know what that meant, and you say, well, if a child lives in a single parent household, they're less likely to have advanced degrees. We were actually in the car talking with my partner, and they said it was 1.5 years fewer if you grow up in a one-parent household compared to two. So once you start backing down, it was so much collateral consequences by you arresting the people in our communities. So unfortunately, rescheduling is not enough for me. Unfortunately, rescheduling, I don't care about the tax write-off when currently I actually should be standing behind wealth. I should be wealthy. My bloodline should be wealthy. The community should be wealthy. So I think it's like that is the first step to restore the actual harm of what was done. I think also when we talk about what that means for the Black family, through the housing, such as the Department of the Housing Authorities or any type of government subsidies, if in an event someone had a conviction, they were not able to come home to your house. So because they were unable to come home to your home, that also led to a disruption in the Black community and families. So I think when I first started, that's easy. That's the easy part because that's my own identity. I understand it. I can relate. But then I started thinking about my friends who are business owners and they need this money. And what does it actually mean? As Chad shared earlier, there are currently 400,000 jobs right now in the 38 states that exist. And because of that amendment that I was telling you about, they're not bothering them. It's still gray, but the government letting you rock out. What happens when they reschedule and they haven't actually, it still requires oversight. What does that oversight of employment look like? Do you really want somebody who doesn't know what it's like to run your business, making a decision about your business because you're not at the table? I don't know. It sounds cute until they say something and you like, wow, I didn't expect it to be like this. So I think when we talk about language, currently I haven't seen a very clear plan of what the job work enforcement will be. So I think it made me like step back and wonder. Currently, again, in states, it is considered a gray area. So I say that to say that amendment is allowing this DEA oversight to be limited. But what does it look like for states to actually be able to move forward if rescheduling does not talk about, are you going to still be able to have stores? What are those stores going to look like? I think something I'm proud of about New York, and they don't talk about it enough. I actually was reading an article on the way in here, is New York has the highest Black-owned dispensaries in the nation. We, in the last 2 years, we have 9 times the rate. I think it was 90%, actually it's 90%, I'm almost certain, 90% increase nationwide in what that looks and felt. What? That's not what you're seeing in the news. That's not the conversations and dialogue that we're having. So I was like, okay, so by us also having this, what happens to those businesses? What happens when people aren't prioritizing it? What happens when it's already not written into the top of the law? Who, like Precious said, is making the decisions that will move us forward in that industry? I think when we started thinking about how we're going to begin to restore harm, I would love for them to use states that were disruptors, such as California. California didn't get it fully right, but I do think New York got it more right. Do I think New York is perfect? Absolutely not. Is there things that they can make better? Of course. But we are it's kind of like a baby. It started in 2021. You're not going to strangle a baby. Unfortunately, in New York, we strangled the baby. So when I think about rescheduling, I'm concerned that because the lens of the world actually is equitable. When you think about what's happening in the world and young people are somebody said it before, when did you ever see college kids on the wrong side of history? When have young people actually who stood up and said something, we look back, I don't know, everybody like, oh yeah, they were trouble. In hindsight, I mean, look at Martin Luther King, somebody that everybody knows. Back in the day, they were not saying, Martin, we're with you. They were saying, that man's a disruptor. He's out of control. Look at this man riling up the kids. So right now, I think it's not enough disruption, and it's a lot of complacement. I think that we do want to do something. They're not sure how to do it. Thus, they're moving in a direction that seems a little bit ambiguous. But ambiguous is dangerous. Ambiguous is confusing because oversight will happen, and I'm not sure if the oversight will recriminalize the plan. Because when the federal government takes over, I think it's a good example to think about products. Currently, if an event is rescheduled and you have your lemonade or your juice, I don't know what's called lemonade, but your juice, your punch. Okay, you want to take that. Now, yes, you got that 280E, you paid the taxes, whoop, whoop. I touched your products, and it has something that the FDA says you can't have in it. That no longer is able to be your product. Did you actually look to see if what the products that you have will be able to move in this federal market? Or now is your product great? You also, just like a Chewy bar, I don't know, everybody eats granola bars. Granola bars are FDA approved. So now that's another process. What does that actually look like for payment? I never say anything to the FDA. I do not know how to test it. I cannot speak to that. But one thing I know, America ain't cheap. So I highly doubt testing a granola bar was a cheap experience. And once they got to it, what if they wanted to tweak the chocolate? And they decided, I don't like that chocolate anymore. Every time, as you know, with every SKU, you got to change it. Is it just on a federal level? Is it on a state level? It made me think as a community member and a business owner, who do I want making the decisions? And what does it look like for me to actually have a voice, a part of what it looks like? If you deschedule cannabis, it would then allow it not to be under the Controlled Substance Act. Thus, you will create a regulatory board, just like the drug, food, and that's oversight. So you would have some level of oversight, but I do see the leaders across the 38 states that are currently doing the work. I see them being voices of how to get this right. I don't know if rescheduling creates an avenue to put those voices that have actually got it right in a space that they can make the change. So it feels very scary. Currently, until July 20th, you are able to write a comment. There's an organization or a coalition of organizations. It's called decriminalizemarijuana.com. Super simple to remember. If you go to this website, it will show you how to make a public comment, but make it super easy. I was on a meeting and they said out of the 17,000 comments, I think about 57% of them said descheduling in them. I say that to say people do want to change, and I think it actually mirrors what America looks like. America is a melting pot. America is not just this one-dimensional lens that everyone is trying to make it seem like. But I also think if we want it to be as dynamic, all of those voices have to be heard, and you can only do that by first recognizing the history. This started because Nixon said intentionally he wanted to cause harm in Black and brown communities. If I go back to the day Nixon made that decision, we probably would be having a very different conversation. I look at countries who, like you said, have extensive research. I'm not even saying that. They have found right now in America, they have no deaths associated with cannabis. Direct cannabis. I'm not talking about laced cannabis. I'm talking about the cannabis that was tested. People used it. There are currently no deaths associated with that. So if we're seeing no harm, we see that they said by 2030 that 90% of American states would have already had some level of cannabis. The use of alcohol have decreased. In Chicago, for the first time, cannabis tax revenue have succeeded alcohol. Young people not doing alcohol like that no more. Alcohol, people be crazy. No shit. People get a little bit, it's like the oils, they get a little bit active. Y'all know, because they get active. That's not what it looks like in cannabis. And so when we talk about how do we move forward, I think you can't move forward without acknowledging the past. I don't care how many things that I give you, none of them trumps the harm that was done to the communities that were disproportionately impacted. I can't feel confident. I know something's gonna happen. I feel it. Yeah, I feel it. This has never happened. And I also think by Biden publicly saying it, he's in his way at trying to affirm that right, regardless of whatever the affiliations of that is. But what does that look like in actual practice? Practice means that you're putting the communities first, and that is us. And New York got it right by saying, hey, we're actually going to give you the opportunity, which is why we have the lowest application rates in the country. It's never been done. Why right now, the majority of the businesses in New York are small businesses, is why the people that are our friends are in community stakeholders that we've seen. Yeah, it's been crazy, but it's real people in our community right now that I know who grow cannabis and I can go buy their pre-rolls. It's real people right now that I know, not somebody else. Like, I could take you to them. Like, that's how close they are. It's not like, oh, it's this, superstar. You're not gonna get real close to the government. Like, we're not gonna be able to pull up to the White House and go like, let's smoke a J. That's not happening. But can you go to your community and the people around you and do that? Yes. I do hope to see a shift in finance. I do hope to see a shift in money. I do hope to see a shift in wealth. And I also do hope to see a shift in jobs. I'm currently, as I shared earlier, getting my PhD. What I'm looking at is why colleges should reform. I know that we're old. I know that I'm like old compared to the young people who are currently applying to college. But I would have loved to be able to tell my nieces and nephews and children that when they graduate high school, hey, I had a winery. I want y'all to grow my business. I don't care what you go to college for. Grow it. I wish that could have been the same conversation in the Black community and brown communities and just communities in general, but that's not the conversation because it was hidden. You even think about how we're growing. Currently, a lot of people enjoy indoor. That's they prefer because, unfortunately, we talk about importing of cannabis and the state lines and the trafficking and all the blah, blah, blahs of it. Well, in reality, it's because of prohibition. People went inside to grow because of that. When you actually start looking at other countries in, what's the show we were watching? Strain Hunters. Mm-hmm. Go on YouTube. It's a crazy show, but it's called Strain Hunters. And they go all over the world. And they were in South Africa. I've never seen weed grow so large in my life outside. And to be honest, I never heard the term sun-grown until people started talking about New York cannabis. So I think it requires us also to, which is not seen in rescheduling, a level of language, like what Chad did, grounding us from the same part. I think we're all starting from so many different starting points. It makes it hard for us to have a clear vision of, am I for rescheduling? Am I for descheduling? I don't think that because I'm for descheduling, I'm not for rescheduling. I say that to say there are things that are in rescheduling that are positive, that we need to bring over to descheduling. But when we talk about the approach, descheduling seems and would be the start of restoring harm. To restore harm of 45 years, baby, that's not going to happen in 1 year. That's not going to happen in 3 or 5. But it will happen in 15. It could happen in 20. And if you get a dispensary and then you hire 20 people from your community and then they went back and did something else, then that is the beginning of what it looks like to reshape federal policy. So when I think about why descheduling is the option, descheduling is for the people. I feel like rescheduling is for the government. And I'm for the people. I'm for the people. I'm for the people and us being able to advance. And not just because your parents were wealthy or your great grandma had money. Or if you decided to invest in Bitcoin, I'm not going to say it out loud because somebody should have invested in Bitcoin. Because you probably have brothers and sisters and cousins who are like, get Bitcoin. This is the Bitcoin of the future. I know there's someone who wrote AI and they told their mom, yo, this is about to be a hit. Mom, invest in me, invest in me. Many times you sat down with somebody and you had an idea and you were trying to convince them to believe in the future. It's not going to be without hiccups, regardless of which direction. Use New York as an example. The more you push for equity, the louder it is, the more it is uncomfortable. It does mean that people might have to wait. It does mean that sometimes the laws might feel unfair because equity does not mean equal. Equity means access and resources. And I might need 5 million, you might need 25 million, and you might need 5,000. But we all got to the same point. And it's not only just money. So I think that the next steps that I'm hoping to see is that community members are going to decriminalizemarijuana.com, that they are voting to actually, commenting. The website I gave you, it does do a auto-populate of a comment. So if you never did a comment before, it's not a big deal. It's not like this hard thing. It has an auto population. Also on June 20th, you are able to request a hearing. The reason you want a hearing is you want people to have this dialogue. You want them to actually, let's duke it out. Let us actually get to the roots. You might have had your own opinion of why you wanted to do it. Let us have this, bipartisan dialogue to move people forward. I think people are scared, but you are able, again, on that website to access resources that are able to help you. There are coalitions that are working across America tirelessly. Some who are getting paid, some not. They're working because they know that to be on the forefront of history is happening. It's not a question, is cannabis changing? The question is, when is it changing? How is it changing? If reschedule passes on July 20th and it goes smooth and it goes through, people who are voting for descheduling are not just going to stop talking. They're not just going to be quiet just because it didn't pass. So I do believe rescheduling can open the door. But if you could get it right on the first time, why gotta play? Why we gotta play like this? We don't even gotta play. We don't even have to have this conversation. Let's just get to the business. But I understand that currently our government is, young people are not actively engaged. Young people are so annoyed with politics. Young people are just like, I don't want to talk about it. It's annoying. Man, what? Who? I'm not voting. All of those things are my real feelings all the time. But if not you, then who? And imagine what the world will look like. Think about if every day you walk outside of your house and you just threw a plastic bottle. You don't even got to do nothing. Just throw that plastic bottle and do that same thing for 20 years. When you come back, your house in 20 years is not going to look like the house when you purchased it. It actually might not. It might be very polluted. Well, that's what has happened in America. For the last 20 years, we just kept putting plastic bottles in the communities that did not serve it. And currently, we're seeing the residual, which is the violence, which is the lack of the breakdown in families, which is lack of resources, which is also people who in politics don't support your values. I don't know these people. We don't know these people. Like, we know them, but a lot of them been here longer than your mom been born. Like, so I think this is the time to be like a small, I don't like to use the word uprising because it makes it seem like it's something negative. But I think an uprising of mental, of intellect, an uprising of being informed. There are currently jobs that do not exist. They're planning for $1 billion industry. They currently do not have the infrastructure to support it. They do not have accountants robustly who are in cannabis. That is a rare thing. They do not have researchers. They do not have project managers. They do not have insurancers. They do not have extractors. They do not have seed geneticists. How many of your friends, they outside planting and they love cross-pollinating plants, just regular plants? They like, I'm going to take this flower and make this flower. Imagine if we were inspiring the next generation to actually move forward in conversation. I think we will be in a different place. Descheduling is going to allow the opportunity to move to that place. So thank you all for listening to my pros and cons. Hope you learned some stuff.
Yeah. All right, first, I definitely want to give both of them another round of applause. They both killed it. Before we move on to the next one, this is the part that we end the live. So thank everybody who got a chance to tune in with us, or if you're watching after the fact, this will be posted on YouTube. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time. All right. So